Good morning. Let me figure this. So we're here to talk about working with auditors. And, in our business, the financial management community across DHS, I dare say that there's no one in the room that hasn't had that experience, whether it was with the DHS Office of Inspector General to include their contractors, KPMG perhaps, on the financial statement side, or with the Government Accountability Office, or increasingly in DHS. A lot of folks don't realize it, but DHS at any one time, department-wide, we've probably got about 18 different audits going on across the department that involve, other than DHS OIG or GAO, they involve other IGs across the town. There are 73 federal IGs, anywhere from the Department of Transportation to the Central Intelligence Agency, and at any one time we have about 18 of them doing audit-related work within DHS, not so much auditing us, although we have gotten recommendations from the Special Inspector General from Afghanistan Reconstruction has actually written recommendations to DHS on a couple of occasions. But most of these other audits are collecting information to inform audits back at their departments or agencies. So I just wanted you to be aware of that activity in case it ever might come across your path. So this is the overview. We're going to talk about senior leadership direction, and then Jeff and I have pretty much split the presentation between performance audits or financial statement audits. Because most of you work on the financial statement side, Jeff will probably have about 2/3 of the remarks, and we'll drill down that on a little bit more detail. The performance stuff, many of you also have those. For example, DHS OIG does Data Act audits, IPERA, things like that you might occasion to work with the auditors on. And so that's what my office works with the auditors, helps facilitate the successful accomplishment of those audits. Jeff, his office does the financial statement audits. Before we get started on leadership direction, though, I just wanted to give you a couple remarks about why working with auditors is so important at DHS. I just wanted to set a foundation, and it didn't put a slide on this, perhaps I should have. But back during the 2008 to 2010 timeframe, we had some really, really bad relationships with both GAO and the OIG. Many of you who probably weren't here at the time, there were no fewer than probably 10 or 12 congressional hearings where GAO went up and testified about DHS's quote-unquote resistance to legitimate congressional oversight. It got so bad that the appropriators were fencing the secretary's budget. You know, they would say, okay, you get $30 million to run your front office, but you can't spend $10 million of it. It's embargoed, it's fenced, the release conditioned upon increasing better relationships with GAO in this case. And how was that defined? Back in the day, DHS had to do a quarterly congressional report to Congress. If GAO asked for an interview, was it scheduled within X number of days? If they asked for a document, was it provided within X number of days? DHS spent all of its time tracking and monitoring that type of activity, which I think most of us will agree was a complete waste of time. And that's what we had to endure. Fortunately, Congress wrote a new law and did away with that quarterly congressional reporting requirement. We don't have to do that anymore. But that's just to set the groundwork for why it's important to work with our auditors effectively. And we'll talk a little bit more about the benefits for doing that. First of all, senior leadership direction. So the first bullet talks about, there's a management directive, in case you're not aware of it, it's about relations, DHS relations with the Government Accountability Office. And it basically says what the quote says. You know, we're going to work with them to conduct their audits as appropriate. The thing to keep in mind between GAO and DHS, GAO is a creature of the legislative branch. OIG is part of the executive branch. OIG is part of DHS. They have a unique and independent status within the department. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. There's a directive 08.10.1, which talks about the OIG's duties and responsibilities. It goes into more depth about their unique and independent status within the department. They have a dual reporting relationship. They report both to Congress and under the general supervision of the Secretary. So something to keep in mind. We have a Secretary's memorandum. The current one is dated 2014. There's only been 3 of these memorandums in the department's history that I'm aware of. We don't update it with every new secretary because if the guidance still stands, the guidance still stands, and it's just it's a new name and signature block. But this memorandum, if you're not aware of it, it's available on our DHS Connect intranet website. I encourage you to visit the website and look at the memorandum, because what it does is it speaks from the secretary to all of us in the department, including contractors, and it articulates what the secretary's expectations are in terms of working with the OIG. And again, that includes the OIG's contractors. If there's KPMG you're working with, consider them just like the Office of Inspector General. There's another piece of criteria, the annual Deputy Secretary's strategy for financial audits. This was just signed for this year a couple days ago on the 29th of April, so you may not have seen this year's version. It also talks about enterprise risk management, and I encourage you to take a look at that. Real quick, access to information, always an issue when working with auditors. There are no limits for the IG. The IG gets to have access to everything, including pre-decisional and deliberative. That's something that's important to keep in mind. Conversely, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, again, part of the legislative branch, they do not get access necessarily to everything. And we'll talk about some specifics here in a minute. I'll give you an example right now. Many of you are probably aware of OMB Circular A11, Section 22, and it talks about budget-related information and what we share with the folks outside of the department. GAO is outside of the department, and per A11, we do not share presidential or budget inputs to OMB, what OMB may have said to the White House. I mean, the bottom line is we support the president's budget, period, end of story. If they have questions about that pre-decisional and deliberative information that goes into the budget, GAO really needs to talk to OMB or the White House, but we don't share that with them. Conversely, we do share that with the OIG. We have to share that with the OIG. So it seems a little contradictory, but access to information sometimes is one of the sore points we end up with auditors, and so I throw that out as a highlight. There are other limits for GAO. Generally speaking, the attorney-client privilege we don't share with them, as well as some other things. We have a lot of privileges. The thing to keep in mind is that DHS, the default is to be open and transparent when working with auditors. Just because we have a privilege, we're not going to necessarily exercise it. We'll take them on a case-by-case, facts and circumstances of the situation and make decisions and think about precedents and things like that. The most important thing to do when sharing sensitive information with auditors, whether it's NSI, national security information, secret, top secret, that type of thing, or SBU, sensitive but unclassified, FOUO, LES, SSI, is to please make sure that the documents have got the appropriate restrictive markings on them. Unfortunately, in many cases, given the ops tempo across the department, there's a lot of FOUO or LES information that's not always properly marked. It's given to an auditor 6, 8, 9 months down the road. We get into discussions about, is it really sensitive? How can that be? The auditors say, because it wasn't marked when you gave it to me. So we want to be mindful of that. This slide here, 7 principles for ensuring successful outcomes. I'll just run through them really quick, but we found that these do truly help with the audits. The first one, believe that audits make things better. In doing that, the focus needs to be on the DHS mission. If we're focused on the mission, we're going to be more than halfway towards having a successful audit outcome. That focus on making things better, you've heard the phrase, I'm sure before, tone at the top, and that comes from the secretary all the way down. It's the tone and working with the auditors and understanding that it's not a necessary evil per se. It's just something that is part of the oversight regime, and we need to work together to get to where we need to be. Understand and respect audit independence. That's arguably, it's a standard. Independence is a standard that the auditors have to adhere to, And unfortunately, it's arguably perhaps one of the least understood standards, especially by auditors. It's a standard that speaks to a lot of different things. Independence of mind for the individual auditors, independence of the audit organization, how professional skepticism is defined, for example. And it's something that we need to be mindful of. We don't have to adhere to it. It's something the auditors have to adhere to it. But again, sometimes, particularly with perhaps more junior audit team members, they just think, hey, I'm with the IG, I'm independent, that means I can blow and go and do what I want. It's not what it means. And sometimes, due to a lack of understanding, they can come across as insulting, particularly on the professional skepticism, how that's defined. I mean, they are not supposed to just accept what we give them. They have to do a certain amount of audit testing. But the key is not doing it in a suspicious or cynical way, which unfortunately sometimes we've experienced that. Be open and transparent. Honesty truly is the best policy, even if being less than honest might be appear to be a better path to take in the short term. I can assure you it never is. And the other thing is, with being open and transparent, you'll hear us talk about in our audit liaison community across the department, helping ensure no surprises. That's really key to having successful audit outcomes. Nobody likes a surprise at the end. Be responsive. That means throughout the entire audit life cycle, not just have an entrance conference and then forget about it until you have a draft report, but throughout that entire audit life cycle, be responsive. And the auditors need to be responsive to you. And responsiveness, in short, basically shows how much you care or don't care about something. And that's important. Stay engaged. That's getting engaged early at the entrance conference and staying engaged throughout the entire audit life cycle. Realizing, though, that audits, while they are important, they're not the most important thing that we're doing here at DHS, and we have to keep that perspective for the auditors. They will come in here and they have milestones and performance measures just like everybody else, and we're going to try to help them achieve those milestones and performance measures, but we're not going to do it to the detriment of our larger missions. And sometimes we have to have those conversations with the auditors. And I'd like to say everything's negotiable. We get these suspenses. We're going to do the best that we can to provide the auditors what they need when they need it, perhaps a day or two early, perhaps a day or two late. But we just have to have that conversation. And you know, bad news doesn't get better with age. If we're not going to be able to meet their requested date, we need to have that conversation and find out what's driving it, particularly with GAO. GAO sometimes has what they call committed reporting dates to the Hill, and I can guarantee you that if they cannot meet their committed reporting date, it's never GAO's fault. It's that big bad DHS that didn't get it to us in time. Even though GAO, quite frankly, and I love my GAO friends, but they may have run the game clock out and we didn't have time to get it to them. But we just need to work it out and get it to where we all need to be. Prepare detailed management responses. So some of you have probably heard about OMB Circular A50. A question that I get frequently, can we partially concur with things? The answer is no. OMB Circular 50, A50 talks about agree or disagree. We have to fall to one side of the fence or the other. I will tell you it's okay to disagree. We have to make sure, though, we're just not disagreeing because we don't like something. We have to have a substantive reason. And we have to explain it. 3 or 4 sentences is all it takes. And when we agree, we have to say, what are we going to do, who's going to do it, and when's it going to be done? Next item, actively follow up on recommendation implementation. A lot in the past with DHS, part of the reason we had bad relationships and some of the troubles that we got into was because we would tell the auditors whatever they wanted to hear to make them go away. Oh, I have to say the magic word concur and you'll go away? Okay, I concur. See you later. Knowing that we never intended to take any action or do anything. Okay, that's not good. When we say we're going to do something, we have to do everything possible to do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it. Gone are the days where we just shine somebody on, because this stuff doesn't go away. There's a letter, used to be a 60-day letter. It's now, as of January 3rd this year, it's called a 180-day letter. But 180 days after we receive a GAO report with recommendations, we have to send a memorandum to OMB and Congress providing an update on our management response. So even when the audit's done, we still have to follow it through to a logical conclusion. We just can't ignore these things. So follow up on the recommendation implementation, that's critical. I could talk probably an hour on these 7 principles, but I just wanted to give you a taste of them. Our DHS Connect intranet website URL is listed there at the bottom. Please visit that if you haven't looked at it before. There's a lot of content on that webpage. All of the DHS directives and instructions, the Secretary's memo that I previously mentioned, you can find those there, and hopefully those will be of interest to you. So kind of closing up on my portion of the presentation, there's a couple of takeaways. First of all, it takes 2 to tango, and I'm talking about the auditor and the auditees. Obviously, GAO and OIG are the auditors. We're the auditees. Some folks sometimes refer to us as the client. We are not GAO's client. We are not the IG's client. We're the auditee. The client is basically Congress. The client is the public. And it takes 2 to tango. Just because you have the music doesn't mean you're going to have a good dance. And the successful audits, the oldest lie in the auditing profession, you know, we're here to help you, and we tell them that we're glad they're here to help. It's kind of a joke. I put it up there because it's hard to get away from, but I put it up there to remind folks that successful audit outcomes are more of a mindset. If we look at the auditors as the enemy and something bad that's occurring, we're not going to have good outcomes. So we can have fun, we can joke back and forth, but it's really about that relationship of having the auditors truly be part of what we're trying to achieve here in DHS. And then last, the second bullet, both the auditors and the auditees have a fundamental responsibility to ensure that the resources expended on audits provide a positive return on investment for stakeholders. It's a shared responsibility between management and auditors. It's not one way or the other. When we talk about resources, we're all in the financial management community here. A few things are guaranteed in life, but the increasingly scarce and limited resources that we have to do our jobs, to execute our missions, are just going to become more increasingly scarce as we move forward. So we need to get the biggest value out of every dollar that we can. And again, we have to work together to do that. There is a law that was passed on January 3rd of this year. It's called the GAO-IG Act, and it does require now DHS and all departments and agencies to annually, as part of the budget justification, to disclose the status of all open recommendations. We have to provide an explanation for recommendations that were closed as unimplemented, and we need to specifically comment on any OIG recommendations or findings where they say that, you know, $300 million of funds can be put to better use. Congress is going to assume, the default is that if they say $300 million of funds can be put to better use, they're going to assume that's true unless we provide the other story. You know, they're going to want to know, did you save $300 million? And if so, somebody's going to probably think they can claw it back. If you didn't save $300 million, you need to be able to articulate, I saved 150, I saved half of it, or I didn't save any of it, and be able to explain it. Or they're going to assume that the auditors are right, and that's money that they can take back, and we all know that there's no money there to take back in more cases than not. So the world is changing, and we're kind of going through that first report right now as we speak, actually. Last but not least, I just put a quote down there from Comptroller General of the United States, Gene Dodaro. Gene is a great guy. He's been at GAO 46 years. It's the only job he's ever known. He is really a supporter of DHS in the last 8 years when we've turned our relationship around. They quote there that GAO probably has the best relationship with DHS of all agencies. He made the first week of March when he was testifying on this year's high-risk report. At first, I was a little miffed with the word probably, but trust me, that's huge for Gene Dodaro to come out and say that about any department or agency. He just doesn't talk that way. He also testified yesterday before Congress on the issue of high risk and priority recommendations, and as well as some of the leadership challenges we're having at DHS. He was very complimentary to the department. And again, I say that's a credit to all of you that work with both GAO and the OIG. You guys do an incredible job fitting the auditors in as you have to and making it work for everybody. And we see the results in that when the Comptroller General of the United States is actually up there telling Congress things are not as bad as some folks might be portraying it as, because, you know, we do kind of cooperate and graduate. It's not always easy, but it's very, very important that we do that. So let me stop there and turn it over to Jeff, who's going to drill down on financial statements.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. And good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Bobich. I'm the Director of the Office of Financial Management at DHS. Been in that role for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was at TSA, so I have both the component and the headquarters perspective on financial statement audits. One of the primary functions of our office is the management coordination of the annual financial statement audit, which since the beginning of the Department of Homeland Security has been performed by KPMG under contract to our Inspector General. In the back of the room, we have a couple of members of our staff. Roberto Sepulveda, if you stand up or wave, is our audit liaison, and then James Zoon, the acting deputy director. So much of what we do now for the next 6 months or more actually will be focused on ensuring we have a successful financial audit for FY19 and getting us to what we expect to be a clean audit opinion for the 7th consecutive year. Let me have a show of hands. How many of you in the course of your jobs work with the financial audit with the KPMG auditors? Okay, a good number, most of you. A couple folks look a little sleepy though. So let me ask a few jokes. What disease do accountants suffer from that ordinary people don't? Depreciation. All right. Why don't accountants read novels? Because the only numbers are page numbers. All right, and I have more. I could go on, but that's not what you came to hear. Our presentation, the rest of my presentation today is geared towards helping you have a successful engagement with the KPMG auditors on the financial audit here at DHS, and hopefully the tips and techniques that I provide really will be applicable to any engagement with the financial statement audit should you move on to other organizations, other departments later in your career. So the FY19 audit is underway. Everyone, all the components have had their entrance conference sometime in the month of April. And I have some keys to success to highlight. So first up is audit management. And this really gets at the role of the component audit liaison or audit liaison staff. It's important up front to set a well-defined, mutually agreed upon audit calendar. The audits, financial statement audits are, unlike a GAO or IG audit, which can be a different topic each year, each audit. The financial audit is basically the same thing, same program each year. Little changes, and I'll talk more about those changes because they usually create a big risk. But conceptually, it's the same thing each year. The goal of the auditors is to be able to opine and state that our financial statements accurately present our balances and that we have no material weaknesses or reportable conditions over internal control. That's their goal. It's the same objective each year. So you should be able to work out the due dates for when the various audit deliverables, or PBC, prepared by customer items, are due months in advance. Your role then is to be an effective liaison and get the auditors what they need. Some of you may, I'm sure probably most of you have had the experience with this. Auditors may not always know exactly what they need. They may not be familiar with our process, our systems, our businesses. These audit firms tend to bring in a lot of new people with not a lot of experience. So you need to help them. If they have a certain report, if you have a certain report that will answer the mail, they may not know what to ask for, but your job as the liaison is to effectively be the advocate and get them what they need to help them provide that opinion that we want to get at the end of the year. And then regular status checks at all levels. Now, this is an important point. If you're going to be late with something, an audit deliverable, it's important to get ahead of that early on and renegotiate the date or ask for an extension. Already this week in the department, we've heard from the auditors that a particular component they're seeing a pattern of asking for extensions at the last minute. So that's concerning if this is happening and it's only April. I mean, that's concerning. And you need to take another look at your calendar. If the schedule is wrong or it's unrealistic, now is the opportunity to reset it for the rest of the year. And it's mutual. And again, they may not know what reasonable dates are. We have a reporting cycle driven by when we submit to T-year, when the deliverables are due. In some cases, the auditors have asked for deliverables from the PBCs from the components before the deliverable is due to the department. Well, that isn't going to work. And they just probably took last year's date and carried it over, but our calendar may have changed. So it's reasonable to ask them to fix it. But you want to avoid doing that at the last minute and be out ahead of that. That's the overarching point there, is to manage your audit calendar. Leadership support, second point, so important. So we're all part of a CFO office. The real power of a CFO organization is the budget, right? The control over the purse strings. Your CFO should be able to help use that with the program offices and the mission offices to ensure that they support and engage on the audit and provide what they need to help us pass the audit, move roadblocks out of the way. Third point, risk assessments. So hopefully everybody did a risk assessment by now. This should be done during what I call the off season of the financial audit, January, February. Unfortunately, the shutdown kind of blew up our off season this year. But before the audit starts, it's asking yourself in a structured manner, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? And usually what could go wrong is something that either A, went wrong last year, good chance it could go wrong again during this audit if you haven't taken the appropriate corrective action, or B, something that's changed from last year. We've got a new system. We've got a new standard operating procedure. We've got key personnel have retired and new people are there. They've never been through the cycle. Those are the things that you want to identify during your risk assessment and have a mitigation in place so the risks don't become actual audit problems. Structured internal control testing. So this is the ICA 4 A123 program that we have at the department, every component has, and for that matter, every agency and government now. In theory, it should allow us to find and fix all the issues before the auditors do, in theory. It doesn't always work that way, but obviously we are making progress. The better your testing is, the easier your financial audit will be. And that leads right into the next thing, validation and verification of remediation. Every year we see people, different offices, organizations, components will say, yeah, we had this audit NFR last year and we fixed it. And then the auditors come in and they go, no, you didn't. We tested it and it failed. So do you have effective validation and verification? Did someone in your organization independently test it? Basically mimic the auditor's procedures It should be your internal control organization, but you could do it yourself. And if they tested it, did they document their test results? That usually helps a lot. It's a best practice, and feel free, assuming the testing passed, to share those results with the auditors. It may save them a lot of work and may save you a lot of time if they can just reperform what your internal control group did to test something and conclude that it was indeed remediated. Also saves a lot of frustration, because when you represent to the auditors that you fixed something and then they find you didn't, that damages your credibility, unfortunately. And I've had it happen to me, and I'm sure many of you have had that same experience. So that's a key point. If you're going to say, yep, we fixed this, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you certain? And do you have test results that back that up? So you're not just, they can't just accuse you of, as Jim said, giving the auditors the answer they want to hear. And then the last point on this slide is organizational awareness. So this is something I've learned the hard way. But our friends from KPMG have a service they subscribe to that combs the news media. And any articles about your component or DHS, it sends an email to the audit team. Happens all the time. So they'll say, I see that FEMA is going into the commercial market for reinsurance because it was in the Wall Street Journal. Or CBP is doing something with the border wall system. Unfortunately, KPMG has a real advantage with this tool, where they get sent to their email box any news articles about their clients. So we often have the situation where they're asking us, oh, you did this. I go, I don't know about that. But it's something that you should all strive to get ahead of. And there are tools available. For example, the GAO-IG Liaison Office here under Jim puts out a report daily of news articles about GAO and IG findings. The different public affairs offices have news clips and other services. It sometimes takes a while to read through them. But it's worth your time if you're an audit liaison to be up on those things, because unfortunately KPMG is, thanks to this service that they subscribe to. So those are a few tips, a few keys to success, and a few things that frankly I've learned the hard way. Effective audit coordination. So again, this is, I'm not going to read all of these bullet points because we don't have time, but just a few things to highlight. Third bullet down, anticipate potential problems. This goes back to what I said a moment ago about your risk assessment. And it goes back to last year's audit. What has changed? Do you have new systems, new programs, budget changes, influxes in the budget? This happens all the time. Last year, a number of components got money for the disaster recovery to repair damaged facilities after Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So any time, or a number of years ago, we had the stimulus. You may remember the ARRA back in about 2009 or 2010, those of you who are around